We have two scripture readings today. The first one comes from the book of Genesis, and I know, following the lectionary, you've heard some of these stories, but we don't really know the beginning. We don't know the end. This is a section out of this saga that goes from Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and now we're in part of Joseph's story. Joseph is the dreamer. Listen again for the word of God in this reading. Jacob settled in the land where his father had lived as an alien, the land of Canaan. This is the story of the family of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. He was a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now, Israel, and in this context, Israel's synonym, another name for Jacob, so his father Jacob. Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other children, because Joseph was the son of his old age, and Jacob had made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flocks near Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flocks at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." He answered, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring word back to me." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. Joseph came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I'm seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they're pasturing the flock." The man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Gotham.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Gotham. They saw him from a distance, and before he came near them, they conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hands and restore him to their father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. This is the word of the Lord. This is from Matthew's Gospel in the 14th chapter, verses 22 to 33. This is a story of Jesus and his disciples. Listen again for the word of God. And after Jesus had dismissed the crowd, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, Jesus came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, Peter became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped Jesus, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So before I came to Florida to put down roots, I sojourned for a time in Kentucky. And while I was there, I learned about some infamous, notorious ancestors in that region who lived along the Tuck Fork of the Big Sandy River in eastern Kentucky, named Randolph, nicknamed Old Ranald McCoy. His grandfather was born in Ireland around 1750, and many of his ancestors hailed from Scotland. And on the other side of that river, the West Virginia side, was a family that had their origins in England and were a bit more prosperous with land and livestock in this new country. And along the river's bank and among the hollows, those two families raised their children and grew what they could, and probably made a bit of moonshine, and chased livestock and wandered into the wilderness. And in the hill country of the 1880s, there may have been boundary markers and county lines, but few enough fences to keep the pigs and poultry from scattering away. Now, this may be a pretty thin description to help you imagine the difficulty of herding animals or corralling critters a century and a half ago. But imagine in your mind's eye herding sheep in the wild hill country of Canaan, east of the Jordan River, in the uncharted hills 2,000 years ago, without paved roads or wilderness checkpoints, cell phones, or GPS locators. It's probably like looking for a needle in a haystack. But it's a pretty sure bet with the background of our Genesis story, where brothers hated each other and could not speak peaceably to one another, that what Joseph's going to find in their hills is a bit of trouble. They were away from anyone's view, and anything could happen. What we read today is part of that family saga of Jacob, which we've come to learn becomes synonymous with the genesis of a family feud. However, it starts with this father sowing bitter seeds of resentment among brothers, announcing his love for a favorite son. Or when Floyd Hatfield had a hog that old Ranald McCoy claimed was his, saying the notches on the pig's ears were McCoy notches and not Hatfield's marks. Plots of violence and murder were hatched to avenge the grievances, which eventually spun out of control into a family feud that was uncontrollable chaos. The Hatfields and the McCoys hated each other for generations. That's the image I see that connects both these scriptures from the Old Testament and the New Testament. One that is chaos in a family, and the other that's chaos on a lake, where the storms of each kind tear people apart and threaten any kind of peace or possible future. Nobody plans for things to get out of hand. Reuben, the oldest brother, first thought he could come back after dark and rescue Joseph out of that pit. But then Judah saw how to make money on his brother's misfortune, and they sold him into slavery. The genie of chaos and human tragedy gets out of the bottle in all kinds of unforeseen ways and causes untold suffering for years and often generations, even when those involved only think that they're getting even or settling an old score once and for all, and even believe that their revenge is warranted. We didn't delve deep enough into the Genesis story to see how it all will be resolved, but it definitely has the earmarks of the Hatfield and McCoy tragedy that can play out over the generations. If God did not help Joseph stop it by putting into his heart a fuller measure of forgiveness than anyone saw coming. But that's a story for a different day. In the gospel story for today, there is no strife or division between the brothers in the boat. In the earliest imagery of Jesus' followers, the boat represents the church. Disciples gathered in the boat to stay together, and they became a community of faith. Perhaps like you all, doing things together, serving and growing, struggling with the course of the church. And then at some point, sooner or later, people recognize that it's not enough to stay in the boat. Because sooner or later they discover that God is not confined to the boat. In this story, Peter says, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus didn't make a big thing of this. He doesn't lecture or chastise or caution. Just one simple word. Jesus says, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." What strikes me today is that this is more than Peter's story. It's a story about Jesus being Lord of all and connecting with people through faith. Jesus is still calling people to come to him, and we still get out of the boat, the church, to go where he is. Jesus is calling us as Lord of our lives, calling us to step with faith wherever he is. We, all of us, are going to step out of this sanctuary at some point, and Jesus will be in the world wherever the storms of life are. And like Peter, faith will take some of us into wherever those ministries are, wherever the need is. Perhaps it's hurricane relief after a storm in Florida. It may be building Habitat for Humanity homes or sharing food with others through the DACA ministry. You might go where Jesus is calling you, into nursing homes or where friends and relatives are, into classrooms or hospitals or offices, or even with your own families, where we live with all kinds of troubles which can pull us under. Peter isn't stupid or silly to get out of the boat. It is the place where he learns for certain that he needs Jesus most of all in the storms and struggles of life. Where is or where was that struggle for you? Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" I didn't get when it was only a question to Peter why he doubted. But that's the part that makes the most sense to me when I see this as my story also. Jesus is outside the boat calling me to come, and occasionally I step out. Tentative, half-hearted baby steps. And when I'm thinking, Lord, save me, is a heartfelt prayer that comes right out. We've all had times of struggle and doubt when it feels like we're stepping out on less than thin ice, sinking and reaching out and being saved and being able to step out again. That's the pattern of walking with faith and sinking with doubt and being lifted by Christ in ways that we can experience. I'm hoping you can see that pattern in your own life, and that it will encourage you to step out of the boat again. And while you're reflecting on that, just taking a moment to test that out in your own experience. I wanted to offer another just personal experience. This is kind of like a bit of testimony time for me. I went one Sunday to a stewardship conference, and I thought I was going to a church gathering in the boat to talk about time and talent and treasure. And in this particular stewardship conference, the moderator of the General Assembly was there. And at that point, it was a while back, it was Rick Uford Chase, and he said, there's going to be a prayer vigil this weekend, and we're going to gather people to pray for peace. I thought, okay, I'm at a stewardship conference, time, talent, treasure, and he's inviting me to pray for peace. And at this time, I think it was about the 5th year of the Iraq War, it was the anniversary, and they said the prayers are being offered in Washington, D.C. We're gathering people, inviting people to gather at the National Cathedral. And this is not about cameras and publicity and making headlines. We're inviting people to come to Washington to pray. And so it's not something I planned at all. I told my wife, instead of going back home, I'm going to change my airplane and I'm going to fly from Denver to Washington, D.C. And I don't know what's going to happen. You might want to plan to have somebody else lead worship on Sunday. But this is making me crazy. At the time, we couldn't even acknowledge that being at war for 5 years made any real difference in our country or in our lives. And I said, I'm going to pray. And so I ended up at Washington, D.C. We ended up in 120 people on the sidewalk in front of the White House. And who would have thought that praying for peace in front of the White House is considered, or at the time it was considered, a national security risk? Turns out on the sidewalk, you're free to pass, you're free to walk, you're free to move. But if you stop, you could be planning something dangerous, and so that was considered illegal. And so on that particular, probably Saturday, I was arrested for praying for peace in front of the White House. And I didn't see that coming. But on a time when I was drowning in sorrow spiritually, I had a sense of peace, and I felt Christ with me in those prayers. It's just a simple testimony. It'll be different from yours, where you experience God. And the learning for me was stewardship isn't just about time and talent and treasure. It's also about faith and following where Christ would say, come, share your faith in the world. I will be with you. I will lift you up. To God be the glory.